Hi, it's Dave here for Zilog and Moto. I hope you've had a good week. I, as the name of the video states, have been working on yet another arcade conversion after last week's Paperboy. And this time, we have something very different entirely for you. Instead of a Master System game where you have mediocre graphics and worse sound, today we've got a Sega CD game that represented about the best that the system could do, due to the fact that the arcade game it's based on was a technical marvel at the time of release, which was actually 2 years before Paperboy in 1983. I could be wrong, but I would say that Dragon's Lair is probably more well known than Paperboy was, and probably a lot of other arcade titles from that time period. Why? Well, for one, Dragon's Lair was like nothing else at the time. Younger viewers of this video may not be aware, but long before DVD was a reality, there was also another disc-based video medium, and that's called Laserdisc. I've got a Laserdisc here, my copy of Ghostbusters, so you can see it's quite large as compared to a DVD or Blu-ray, being much more akin to a vinyl record. Laserdiscs are not a digital medium for like DVDs or analog recordings, just read with a laser instead of a needle, but due to that precision that optical format provides, they're superior to VHS in overall video and sound quality, and have the ability to go straight to a specific video sequence when selected. Why am I spending all this time talking about a dead video format? Well, in 1983, it was decidedly not dead, so Cinematronics, which had previously focused on vector-based games, decided to look at Laserdisc in its next project to provide the graphics for its games instead. And in doing so, they needed someone to supply said graphics, so they partnered with Don Bluth, a former Disney employee and founder of the studio that was responsible for The Secret of Nim and An American Tail, to create a humorous fantasy adventure called, you guessed it, Dragon's Lair. In much the same fashion, they later produced a sci-fi take called Space Ace that you may be familiar with as well, and we'll be taking a look at that in about 100 episodes or so, assuming I can get a copy that doesn't have water damage manual. Long story short, don't buy games at conventions without thoroughly examining them. But for now, we're discussing Dragon's Lair and its port to the Sega CD. Now, Dragon's Lair, like the aforementioned Paperboy, was ported to everything. However, consoles prior to the multimedia boom in the early 90s simply couldn't do the game justice. It took the proliferation of CD-based media just to even attempt a faithful conversion of the game, due to the 30 minutes or so of animated footage from the original Laserdisc implementation. So how did the Sega CD version fare? Is it a good port? And more importantly, is the underlying game any good? Well, we'll get there, but first, let's take a look at the package. Here's Dragon's Lair. And immediately you can see that large crack in the upper right hand corner, right there. But other than that, and some similar smaller cracks on the back, the case is actually in great shape, which is something you have to watch out for on Sega CD releases, or pretty much any other release that uses this similar case, like Saturn games and some early PlayStation releases when they couldn't make up their mind what the hell kind of case they wanted to use. Nothing too special about the cover here. It looks like a standard second generation Sega CD title with the system label over here on the left side, and some cover art showing off Dirk the Daring, aka you, Daphne the Damsel in Distress, and the eponymous dragon whose lair you're invading, whose name is Singe apparently, along with a collection of other enemies you'll meet throughout the game. This is actually a pretty great cover, although I do think the Dragon's Lair up here at the top is somewhat small. I guess it's because I only had so much horizontal width to work with and didn't want to put it in 2 lines, but it just seems odd that it's that small. At the bottom you see that Sega's rating authority of the game gave it a general audiences rating, which I'm a little surprised about. Maybe not too much, mind you, but there are some monsters and deaths in the game that could be considered nightmare producing for young kids, and Daphne is dressed in a pretty provocative outfit. Again, I don't have a problem with it, but I've been around the more narrow-minded that would. Over on the back, there's the same art as on the front cover, minus Dirk and some of the enemies to make room for the game's description, which is right here. And I think they chose a good color for this font. The text is fully readable and sticks out, It also goes along with the coloring at the bottom of the Dragon's Lair logo. As you can see up here, it kind of goes from red to yellow down at the bottom, and then it's got that same shade of yellow here in the text. Also, speaking of that, look how much bigger the Dragon's Lair logo is on the back compared to the front. I mean, maybe it doesn't seem like much, but it certainly is larger on the back. It just looks much better, and kind of, begs the question again, like, why was it so small in the front? But anyway, over to the right side, we get 4 good-looking screenshots of the game. And, there might have been some cropping on these shots to make them look better, a la what we saw in Ground Zero, Texas, but I don't think they cheated too much. Those screens are, relatively representative of how the game looks, more or less. As we open the case, you see that this copy even has the original foam rubber insert that was included with these Sega CD titles to protect the CD and keep it in place. I really love the original details like that. I know it's kind of silly. The manual is in good shape. I'm going to go ahead and pull this out real quick without damaging it, hopefully. There we go. And, there might be a few minor, bends here and there, like maybe up here or whatever, but, the manual really is in good shape considering. And it's, it's intact except for, if you flip over to the back here, the warranty card is gone. Whoever actually owned this previously did actually pop out the warranty card from the back cover, which is, a little surprising. But, I guess it happens. It doesn't really mar the manual too badly. It's just, it's not like it is actually the back cover. It's just a fold-in, so with it messing, it really doesn't mess anything. And, you still got the advertisements for Space Ace up at the top there. As far as the rest of the manual goes, there's really not a whole lot here. It starts out with the backstory of the game, right here. And a quick look at the controls, right here. And some instructions on how to play the game, right here. All this stuff is pretty standard. But then it goes into hint book mode. If you take a look here, and from here on, basically, at this point, everything that's in here are, hints and tips as to how to pass the various scenes in the game. It doesn't detail the exact steps needed, but it does have a nice write-up on each one that hopefully should push the player in the right direction at least. As a whole, I think this is a very nice package for this game, and it's well presented in general. Let's see if the game itself can live up to its arcade pedigree and this solid package. As stated earlier, Dragon's Lair in the mid-90s got solid ports to all of the major multimedia consoles at the time, all around 1993 to 1994 or so. Along with showing up on the Sega CD, there were also versions for the Philips CDI, 3DO, PC Macintosh, and even the Jaguar CD. From what I can tell, the Sega CD, PC Mac, and Jaguar CD versions were pretty much the same visually, all being produced by Radisoft. 3DO and CDI versions are substantially better graphically, with the 3DO version also being produced by Radisoft, and the CDI version coming internally from Philips. But other than the graphics, the game itself ultimately remains the same, as it's still just a port of Dragon's Lair. Having said all that, the Sega CD version, like many of the FMV-based games on the system, definitely struggles with somewhat grainy video, and a color palette limited to just 64 colors at a time. But what were your other options for playing the game in 1994? The PC or Mac? Well, if you want a similar version of the game and have an expensive computer, sure. But you probably have to fight with using either a keyboard or a crappy 90s computer gamepad. Well, what about the Jaguar CD? That one's similar too, right? Well, it really shouldn't be, as the Jaguar was marked as a 64-bit system, and is definitely more powerful than the Sega CD, but it really looks like the exact same port. but now you have to invest in a Jaguar CD, and use their horrific controller. Okay, well then, what about the CDI or the 3DO? As I said, both of them look like better versions graphically, right? Well, they do, but keep in mind in 1993/94, you get a Sega Genesis CD and the game for under $400. A Philips CDI-based unit would cost about $400 as well, but to play the MPEG-1 encoded video scenes in the game, you also have to lay out at least another $200 for the optional digital video cartridge, and then add in the cost of the game. And finally, while the 3DO version is the best overall version technically speaking, a 3DO version would run you $700 plus the cost of the game, and like the Jaguar, the 3DO controllers are less than stellar to say the least. What I'm trying to say by all this is that if you wanted to play Dragon's Lair in 1994 and didn't want to try to locate an original arcade cabinet, the Sega CD version was going to give you by far the best bang for your buck. So now that we've settled on a specific version of the game, just how good is this version? And how good is the game in general? Well, while a Laserdisc versus a well-encoded MPEG-1 version of the video sequences in the game might be at least comparable, like we see with the CDI and 3DO versions, a Laserdisc versus the capabilities of the Sega CD is no contest, at least from a visual perspective. While the audio in the game will remain similar, if not identical between the versions, the video from the original Laserdisc version is far superior, with more colors and better clarity of images. However, that doesn't mean the Sega CD visuals are bad per se, they just simply aren't as good. The video sequences in Dragon's Lair are as good, if not better, than the video sequences in any other game on a console, and if you've played a previous Sega CD game, you should already be adjusted to the quality of the video available. The best way I can describe the video in the Sega CD version, as compared to the original, is if the arcade version is an original master tape, and the Sega CD version is 2 or 3 generations of copies removed from that original master. As far as the audio in the game is concerned, while the original audio and quality of that audio is more or less retained from the arcade version, that's not really saying much, as there's not a whole lot of audio in the game. There's no overarching soundtrack. Various levels will have sound effects play for the monsters, or the occasional cry of "Save me" from Daphne, if it's a level where she makes an appearance on, and there are brief themes played when a level is completed successfully. But Dirk is the original Gordon Freeman type silent protagonist, only making noises during death scenes, aside from the occasional grunt here or there. I feel like, with as much effort as Bluth put into the animation for the video segments in the game, it seems like the audio for the game was an afterthought, and I don't know why that is. Certainly Don Bluth would have known that the animation needed more to really bring it to life, but I'm assuming that Cinematronics just decided to skimp on the audio sections to focus money and resources elsewhere, and unfortunately, the sound wasn't upgraded at all. It still just is enough to make you realize your TV isn't muted. There's one other caveat that should be discussed in comparing the arcade version to the Sega CD version, and that's the fact that the level structure is slightly different between the two. Due to the limitations of the Sega CD, there are a handful of sequences that didn't make the conversion. However, the bulk of the game is intact, and there are 27 levels available to puzzle your way through. Also, the home version is structured in a way where the levels are grouped into 8 sets, with the player having the ability to lose all 5 of their lives and then continue back at the first level in the group the player left off at. While obviously any player would want to experience the best version of the game available, being able to freely continue as many times as you want to learn and memorize the levels without having to dump a ton of quarters into an arcade machine is a huge deal. While it could be argued that having infinite continues potentially makes the game too easy, all having infinite continues does is ease the amount of frustration involved in learning how to make your way through the game. How does one get through the game? Well, as stated, the game consists of 27 levels that each effectively act as individual interactive cartoons. The controls of the game are deceptively simple. You can indicate that Dirk should move up, down, left, and right, or use his sword to attack an enemy. However, think about what I just said. You indicate what Dirk should do. You don't actually control Dirk in real time. For instance, in the first level, Dirk crosses a decrepit drawbridge, only to fall through a hole that opens up halfway through. After falling through the hole, Dirk catches himself, but quickly a tentacle monster comes to strangle Dirk. You must choose to hit the attack button to fend off the monster, and then hit the up button on the D-pad to make Dirk climb back up onto the drawbridge and enter the castle. However, wait too long to press either of those buttons, or get too eager and hit them too early, and you'll see an animation of Dirk having the life squeezed out of him, literally. In some regards, Dragon's Lair could be considered one of the pioneers of the rhythm game genre, where timing and reflexes are paramount. In doing previous research for the game, I had come across some people complaining that the Sega CD version's timing was too tight. After having played the game, I can kind of understand that, in that your timing does have to be precise to avoid a death scene. In fact, in the Electric Night scene, I was stuck for about an hour before turning the game off and deciding to continue later. The next day, I came back to it, and after a few attempts, figured out where my timing was wrong, in that for a few of the moves in the room, you have to hit the next button in the sequence before Dirk finishes his previous movement. However, now after memorizing the timing, I can pass this level anytime I get to it with minimal problems. And that more or less goes for the rest of the game. Yes, some of the timings are very specific, and honestly, I haven't played the arcade version in probably 20 years, or more, so I don't really know how it compares, but the Sega CD version is certainly beatable, and once most levels are memorized, passing through the game may not exactly be a breeze, as it's easy to make a dumb mistake, but it should go fairly quickly. Making things more interesting for the players that are good at memorizing levels is the fact that the middle 17 levels are played in random order, so that if for one playthrough you memorize having certain scenes follow one another, that doesn't always occur and you have to adjust for that. Also, certain levels are mirrored. What that means is that on some levels, the video to the scene may be inverted horizontally, for example in the previously mentioned Electric Night scene. You have to keep an eye on the video sequence to know whether you should be jumping right or left. Ultimately, it's not too difficult to play the level swapping right or left and vice versa, but if it's in a situation where you've had to play a level numerous times because of mistakes, and you decide to turn the game off and come back to it later, like I did, you may find yourself in the next playthrough that you get the mirror version of a level, and you have to be careful about muscle memory kicking in from your previous attempts and having you accidentally go the wrong direction, just because you're used to doing that. Another convenience to playing this version of Dragon's Lair is the ability for you to pause the game, in case you need to take a quick break, or, like I had to, look up a room solution on the internet. Yeah, I may or may not have done that a few times. Some of the rooms give light indicators on certain sections of the room to tell you where you should attempt to safely move Dirk, but not all rooms have this feature, and you really have to guess correctly or cheat to get through those. However, if you do pause the game, for whatever reason, when you start to play again, you will restart the room you were in from the beginning, rather than picking up where you left off, just due to the nature of the game. While some might find that mildly annoying, I actually have zero problem with it, and any annoyance I might have is far outweighed by the convenience factor of being able to take a break without starting over. All in all, I'm giving Dragon's Lair a 3-star rating. While yes, I wish the quality of the video was a little bit better, and the game is very short, I also recognize that this was a technological achievement to run this game on the Sega CD to begin with. Also, the ability to freely continue after death and pause the game when necessary makes the game much less frustrating than try to play the original game in the arcades. For any early 80s arcade buff that are also Sega fans, Dragon's Lair is well worth giving a look. Okay, that was Dragon's Lair. I'm kind of relieved that I was able to beat it twice, technically. Once when playing through the game for the review research, and then a second time to record the gameplay video. Even though it's technically a short game, I still have a very nice sense of satisfaction for being able to finish it. Next time on Zilog and Moto, it's time to pay tribute to TV legend Alex Trebek in honor of his fighting pancreatic cancer and returning to host Jeopardy in August of 2019. Everyone loves Alex Trebek. He even got 2 pop figures, one from his 80s look with a mustache, and also a modern one without. But just because he's beloved, that doesn't mean this game will be good. It's another Game Tech release, the same company responsible for American Gladiators. So I think I've got reason to be apprehensive. Remember, whatever you play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.